now it's my pleasure to invite Philipp Marsden and Ruprecht Podszun, having in mind the excellence of the competition discography of Philipp Marsden last year. We couldn't not think of him when we thought of the potential study by Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. Philipp is also one of the co-authors of the Furman report, needless to say, and really happy that we're continuing the tradition that you're for the second time with us. Many thanks, dear Philipp. Ruprecht Podszun, in the competition world, I don't need to spend too much words on that. I think one of the most prominent academic commentators when it comes to the all prominent competition cases and instances in the past. For those who would like to understand more in a simple words what's going on in the Facebook case and in other cases, I really recommend his antitrust blog. It was really a pleasure to collaborate with them in the last 5 months. So when I think of the positive side of Corona, that was really this initiative and this idea to collaborate on this concrete project. And here is the product. We had a problem with the delivery chain, but as you could see, we have make it. Many thanks that you are with us today. I hope you're going to enjoy the lecture of the study, but now we have thought that we don't need to present the study in a classical way. It's much better if we discuss, and later we have a common discussion together with Thorsten Käseberg and Andreas Mundt. I have read the study, of course, a couple of times, and if I could summarize the substance of the paper, we basically have 3 parts. We have rules, we have principles, and we have enforcement. Let's start with the first part. Tell me a bit more.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. First of all, thank you very much, Pencho, and to the Stiftung to invite me again from my crazy little island. It's really nice to be here. As Andreas said, an in-person conference, but also in particular inviting me back, considering what's happening on my little island. Also from a health point of view. It's very nice of you to have me here. It was such an honor to be asked by you to work with Ruprecht on this study. The primary reason for me to be so excited about this is that we're combining 2 academics from 2 different perspectives to talk about actually what will we do now? What rules will we start to impose? All right, and what enforcement mechanisms should we impose? These are 2 questions actually that we intentionally did not answer in the Furman report. And so it's nice to be able to develop that and to come from these 2 different perspectives. And the rules we were looking at were actually based on particular principles that we'll discuss tonight about free competition, about fair trading, fairness of intermediaries, and the sovereignty of consumers and decision making. But the rules themselves try to go towards defining some of the aspects that President Mundt was talking about, relating to the kinds of practices that we're most concerned about, whether it's access to data, whether it's discriminatory practices, or whether it's self-preferencing in a larger sense. And we wanted to open a debate about whether we've captured the right concepts, where we've got the right direction as well, but it's intimately linked with the enforcement mechanisms that we propose, because we believe that in this area, and digital is everywhere, but digital is also dynamic. And so as much as we were trying to provide some degree of certainty, in a sense, with respect to some of our proposals, at the same time we were recognizing that it's the enforcement mechanism that will put the flags, that will adjust and make sure that the rules are relevant. So we tried to humbly suggest that we're proposing sensible rules, reasonable rules for effective enforcement.
Would you like to add something regarding the principles? I mean, when we commissioned this study, we didn't want a pure German or pure French or a pure British study. We want to mix the best from our tradition, so to say, the ordo-liberal part from Germany with this liberal spirit that we have on the island. And I think that the paper really, from that point of view, it goes in this direction. Can be read in that direction.
I want to venture whether I have to reject that notion that I'm an ordo-liberal, because sometimes that maybe I'm no longer able to enter any US academic debate or so. I don't know. But
As
I
a
take
German
it
academic, I think we have to be.
absolutely. In Adenauer-Stiftung, I think we can live with that concept. Thanks to Philip and thanks to you, Pencho, for enabling this study. I just want to add I mean, we are now in the context of looking at the EU proposals for a new competition tool and the Digital Services Act. And when I started to think about this, with a lot of help, you got me thinking basically, what I noticed was we now need a breakthrough in all these digital platform regulation issues, because we have seen so many studies, we have read a lot of reports, etc. We have seen a lot of interesting cases, but we now need to make the next step, basically. And the second thing that I understood is, if we need the next step, we need to take it now. We cannot wait for any longer, because otherwise things will be sort of completely stuck or petrified in the digital environment. And also what Philip and I sort of found was that enforcement really matters if we want to have this breakthrough in platform regulation. So that is basically the background to our study. But what was important to us, and you mentioned that, Pencho, is that in the debate we see a lot of different rules or ideas or cases coming up, etc. But what we maybe do not see with such a clear picture is what are really the principles that we want to ensure. And this was one part of our study, to discuss what is it really that we are looking for in a digital environment. And the first thing, obviously, for us is free competition. So you need contestable open markets. You need to have the chance that someone still topples the incumbent, something that we don't see in a couple of issues or in a couple of markets where some infrastructures have maybe already been built. So free competition is number one, and it's something that most people in the room, I see Andreas Mundt sitting here, can agree on, that this is sort of the DNA of what we are doing. But there are basically two other principles that I think are of great importance. The first is fairness of intermediation. Platforms act as intermediaries, so they act as agents basically for both market sides that they bring together. They act as agents for consumers, and they act as representatives of suppliers whom they try to match. And whenever we have this situation, I mean, there are a lot of lawyers here in the room, if you have two clients that you're working for, you're normally conflicted, and you may abuse this power that you have to moderate both sides. And this is something where we have to ensure that platforms don't abuse this situation, so that they act in a fair manner. And this is something which probably goes beyond our classic understanding of antitrust rules. So it is about fairness, which of course is an entrenched concept in EU law as well. But fairness of intermediation is the second principle. And the third principle, you have mentioned it already, Philip, is something that has been highlighted so nicely by the Facebook case of the Bundeskartellamt, namely the sovereignty of people to make their decisions in the marketplace. And this is something, Philip, you said, these are really constitutional values and constitutional principles. And I would completely agree with that. If we think of what really makes a marketplace, why are we doing this? I mean, why have I known for 20 years now? It's not because I think that I definitely need to know that this product is 2 cents cheaper than 2 years ago or so, but it is because I believe in the liberty of people to take their decisions in the marketplace. I want to express my personal economic values. I want to invest where I want to invest. I want to spend my money where I want to spend it. And I don't want to be predetermined by other people who take my decisions. And this is something that I fear that we see in the platform economy more and more, that there are operators, intermediaries, who shape our path in economic things. And this is something that I don't want to sort of put up with, and that is something that we also put into this realm. And I see this, or I think the Facebook case really sheds light on this idea, on this principle of keeping the sovereignty for individual actors to take their decisions autonomously.
I think, Andreas, like what you said, is perfectly fits into into the picture of the latest decision by the Federal Supreme Court, I believe. Is there something to add regarding the principles, or we have covered them?
Let me add just one thing, because it's really just an echo of something that President Mundt said. We all are amazed by the fantastic things that we get to do with these devices. This lovely genie, this lovely thing we rub and some magic comes out of it. Fantastic. Choice, etc. And we're increasingly seeing the world through the eyes of this screen, okay? But It's our world, right? They should be working in our world, okay? And so this is something that President Mundt mentioned. It's wonderful to have these choices, but I get very concerned, as does Ruprecht, by the fact that, yes, we are offered wonderful things and free services and choice, but it is curated for us. Right? And yes, we are able to exercise a degree of choice, but there are so many opportunities, and we hear complaints from many companies and also from consumer groups that there are aspects where they would like to have an opportunity to show that they can compete on the merits as well. And instead, it's the platform that wins rather than the products that win. And so that's something where we really thought that our principles of free competition, fair intermediation, and the sovereignty of decision-making would really be important as a foundation for the rest of our rules.
Perfect. So we continue with, so to say, with the second pillar of your study, and those are the rules, basically. There are many rules that you have in mind. Self-preferencing, we talked a lot about it, but there are many prohibition practices that we have in mind. If you need to justify some of the don'ts and do's, what would you say?
Well, I think the important step first is that we move, and this is something that is difficult for a real competition lawyer, that we move the field of ex-ante regulation in the sense that we give companies certain rules that they need to adhere to. I think this is sort of the change that we are now going into, and the German legislative draft of the GWB, what's that in English again? The Act Against Restraints of Competition, moves into that direction with this prominent Section 19A, sort of giving more detailed ideas about what do we want in competition and what do we not want. And I fully endorse that. I'm very happy with that. We can probably discuss on that later. But maybe we need to take a step more. And this is sort of the first thing where competition people probably have to sort of move beyond their traditional or more traditional lines. And the rules that we devise as ex-ante rules that are in a blacklist or in a delegated act or some form of community or union document, they are of course oriented towards the principles that we've just discussed. So, for instance, interoperability, on-platform competition, things like that need to sort of secure that competition is possible. Then we want to have rules so that companies act, or intermediaries, platforms act in a fair manner, etc. And we have some of that already in the P2B regulation, as all of you will know, the platform to business regulation. But there we have transparency rules. That is to say, then companies, the platforms need to declare what they do. They need to disclose certain way to the companies that are active on the platform. But we see that this is probably not enough. So if I personally, I don't know, maybe Philip, you want to add on that, but personally, I don't stick to, okay, we definitely need this provision now or this provision. I'm fine with discussing that, but I'm pretty sure that we sort of need to move one step further in making certain rules tougher than they are at present.
Exactly, and I very much love the GWB. I don't say that just because I'm in Berlin or visiting Bonn later or something like this, but this is our GWB. It's gold, white, and blue. This is our book, and I feel a bit like I'm at some book reading, if you will. So I will read out some of our rules, if you don't mind. For sovereignty, we have many, many do's, okay? Many, many things that if you are a company and you must do these things, and if you do them, you're okay. All right, so this is not the blacklist, this is the opposite. You know, platforms must offer a real choice on the use of data. This is the inherent aspect of the Facebook case at the Bundeskartellamt. Platforms must allow customers to take decisions. Platforms must give users the service they ask for and not impose mandatory terms or conditions. Platforms must give access to customer and transaction data to the suppliers involved in that transaction. Okay, these are do's. These are good things that we think the market should evolve from. And this is not something that we can provide through ex-post law enforcement after many, many years or something like that. We have many other do's in here, and we have the odd don't as well. And we try to define carefully what we mean by self-preferencing and these other points. But it's what we're so excited about, Ruprecht and I, in writing this, and we worked hard over the summer trying to come to an agreement, is hearing from everybody else what their views are on our points, which should be do's, which should be don'ts, which should be blacklist. Obviously, We allow, in some cases, objective justifications and defenses, these sorts of things. But we want to be able to start discussing that so that they're workable, so that we can get to the next aspect, which is most important to us, which is the actual enforcement.
I could live with Philip reading out the whole paper. I mean, that in such a marvelous way.
There are, of course, a couple of really interesting rules, but maybe you could comment on one specific rule, and that's the rule of openness of platforms. How would you describe it more concretely?
Openness probably has a couple of aspects to it. The one thing is openness means you need to leave or have the platform open for, or the suppliers must have the choice to sort of be on platforms. So exclusivity arrangements are something that we see critically. But obviously, openness also means open APIs, interoperability, data portability that should be ensured, so that we can really move into the field that Andreas Mundt talked about earlier. Namely, you must be able to sort of have new players entering the market and being able to get either on the platform, that's sort of the bottleneck, the gateway aspect, or have competing platforms that maybe one day could topple sort of what's the incumbent. So I think there are a couple of aspects that relate to the question of openness, exclusivity arrangements as one pillar, and the other pillar, the openness of entering markets through or to eradicate technological barriers that may be there.
This is not particularly new for me to say this, but hashtag interoperability stimulates competition. That's all you need to know.
It's a bit long for a hashtag, though.
And it's easy to remember. It's easy to remember, yeah.
I mean, sorry if I may jump in here. I mean, Philip, you've made we draw a lot actually from the British experience with such tools, and we've seen the CMA investigations and market investigations where we have experience with sort of opening fields. I don't know whether you want to talk about that, because I found that very impressive when you told me, basically.
Well, I'll see what I can do. So what I'm trying to say here is this moves us a little bit towards the conversation about the new competition tool at the European and maybe other levels. In the CMA investigation of the banking platforms, and I was honored to be the deputy chair of that investigation when I was an official, we early on thought about remedies. We were identifying if there was a problem and a remedy. And our past practice had said maybe to solve this problem, when you have an oligopolistic market where information is quite confusing, maybe we need to order a price comparison website. We'd done things like that. The provision of more information to the market, like that. Or maybe we should have them, simplify their terms or conditions. But what it suddenly became very clear to us within a few months of the investigation was that the lazy financial platform incumbents were lazy because they didn't have any incentive whatsoever to compete, and there was no ability for new entrants, much more agile. There's no ability for them to get into query the data that the incumbents were holding on. So we realized we were looking in the realm of a data remedy, which meant that we had to have some sort of interoperability standard agreed and forced upon them by an enforcer like the Open Banking Implementation Entity, which the CMA essentially ordered to be created and then funded. And so those kinds of things allowed finally competition to enter the market with new interesting offers. Now, I may have mentioned this last year here, and I hope I didn't, but the point is that some politicians immediately said, why didn't you just break the banks up? Forget a price comparison website. Why didn't you just break them up? Some sort of structural remedy. And we said breaking the banks up wasn't going to do anything to add competition. We just have more lazy incumbents sitting on their data. Okay, so it wasn't divorce that we wanted more engagement by the consumers and by the financial intermediaries. And anyway, our metric for success wasn't would you switch amongst an increasing number of providers. We have strong evidence in the UK that British people switch their spouse more frequently than they switch their bank. And so switching was never going to work, right? And so it wasn't so much about switching, it was more about engagement. More engagement with your incumbent bank, more asking, what are you doing for me? And that goes to the heart of our report. As Pencho nicely said in the foreword of the report, we're trying to make sure that even though the digital companies provide us with so many wonderful things, there is an aspect of, I'm afraid, digital serfdom at the consumer level, completely powerless, as well as the SME level, completely powerless. Do we want to be serfs? Or do we want the consumers to be the kings and the queens again of the marketplace? And that's what I think we're trying to move towards. It's high rhetoric, I know, but that's what's fundamentally driving some of our initiatives.
Perfect. I know many characteristics of incumbents, but now I've learned of laziness, and it really suits perfect to the picture. So now we have rules, principles, rules, and finally in enforcement. Who is going to enforce the rules? I don't believe that everybody at national level is that excited that if everything goes to the European Commission.
Oh dear, Andreas Mundt is still here, so I have to watch my mouth. No, speaking of enforcement of this is a complicated matter, to be frank. So because we have at present several directorates at the Commission dealing with that. It's DG Comp, DG Connect, DG Grow is in the game. And then of course we have all the other actors, national actors, private actors, public authorities, etc. And if you really want to have a meaningful platform regulation, the first thing that is clear for us is we need something at the EU level because we need the digital single market. So the EU Commission probably needs to be at the helm of all this. I'm pretty sure that we need support, or maybe support is a too diminutive word. We probably need a strong role here for national agencies as well. But we probably also need some new entities on the Commission level. We speak of an early alert unit at GG Competition that alerts us to problems in markets where we have to step in. We also have I always get it mix it up in my head anyway, the platform complaints panel and a platform compliance unit, where we think that platform compliance unit at DG Connect could sort of be in charge of coming up with rules and trying to enforce rules. Of course, obviously with the help of others, and we have a sort of, we propose a market investigation regime where independent panels, independent expert groups, sort of matching the British system, could more closely investigate systems. But one thing for me is very clear. We cannot do that without the national competition agencies. We cannot do that without the support of private market actors. Particularly in Germany, we have very strong sort of experience with private companies suing for unfair behavior under the Unfair Commercial Practices Act. And I think that we need something like that, a stronger role here as well. So it should really be an interplay of all these different factors, and we shouldn't be, please, European Commission, Madam Vestager, we shouldn't sort of be lost in intricacies of DG competencies with this unit doing this and that doing that. I think we really need a solution from one sort of source.
And can I just add that there's three sort of fundamental changes that need to be done, which we're almost there. One change, which I think almost everybody agrees with, is that we need to move from ex post law enforcement to some sort of supplemental, where needed, ex ante regulation. So that's quite a shift, okay? The second shift is this idea of importing a new competition tool or a market investigation regime, which, quite frankly, and perhaps to German ears is a bit scary, is identifying structural problems and remedies onto firms, onto companies, but without blame, without any finding of infringement. But you're saying this market is not working as well as it could, and therefore we are going to intervene. And I appreciate that as a very big philosophical shift. Right? And the third aspect is this idea of an interplay amongst the agencies. The agencies are cooperating very well, but there are some directorates general at the Commission which I think are probably quite siloed for various historic reasons. We strongly mandate a stronger interplay between these DGs, and our example in the book is DG Comp and DG Connect. And I'll just give you one sort of fact scenario. If we have an early alert unit, as we're proposing at DG Comp, which is looking at tipping markets, and markets can tip for perfectly legal and economic reasons, but there might be some aspect to which the market is tipping due to some unnatural practices that perhaps should have been caught by the rules, which DG Connect would be in charge of. So the early alert unit could combine and discuss with the platform compliance unit to say, hang on a second here, something happening here where one of these players is not acting according to the rules, and there we're going to see an unnatural tip. And we might also see some complaints coming into our platform complaints unit saying we think there is something going on here. We can't get the access to the data we used to have, or there's, our rankings have disappeared, or whatever. There's, something's happening here which we find is we'd like a decision on. And we propose a very, very fast arbitration mechanism for resolving those kinds of disputes to hopefully ensure that the markets, if they do tip, they tip naturally, but they're not inherently tipping due to some exploitative or exclusionary practice. And so again, it's a supplement to competition law, but it's trying to get ahead of some of the problems rather than just waiting and then having to expend so many resources to try to cure something that has already happened.
I think when we started the discussion regarding the study, we had some common ground. We were not questioning, do we need more stricter rules? You can call it regulation or whatever you want. And we had also common ground when it comes to the issue, we don't want new institutions. But we believe that within this frame, with a better collaboration and with more collaborative approach also with the national agencies, these new rules are applicable, so to say. I think the study offers solid ground for the legislative plans of the European Commission in the fourth quarter of this year. We are really happy that we did it, and that while many studies are simply justifying why we need further regulation, I think we are saying how we should step forward. Now I'd like to invite Andreas Mundt again. Please join the discussion, and Thorsten Käseberg. I hope he's in the room, and would like to hear their view on the matter. I was making a joke with Thorsten a couple of weeks ago. I said, you don't need to be disappointed with our GVB in Germany, since our ideas, as you could see, they have already landed in Brussels. But luckily, last week or 2 weeks ago, we have the new legislation draft arrived into the parliament, and we hope that the next steps will go smoothly. You had the privilege, Thorsten, to take a look into the study a couple of days ago. What's your impression? How this concept capture into the picture of the new draft German law?
So many thanks for the invitation and the chance of being here for the second time. And I think it's really Philip has moved forward the debate with the Furman report. And I think when we talked just outside before, we said that it's maybe sometimes necessary to cast the right stone at the right time. And the Furman report did that, but left open some questions. And I think Ruprecht and Philip have now followed up with more detailed answers, as you discussed before, on substantive rules, on the institutions. And I think we are indeed happy that with the German draft legislation, as you said, we are now entering into the second half-time of the game and hope to have it adopted by beginning of next year. We are actually happy that there's always been a lot of interaction, not only in terms of enforcement between the agencies on the national level and DG Comp, for example, but also conceptually between national, including German competition policy and European competition policy. And in that regard, I think we consider it a very useful approach. We think that there are common elements, as you've highlighted before, in the sense of the principles that you've outlined. And I think, as you mentioned, in particular, in our draft law, we have the provision on the platforms with paramount significance. And I think some of the don'ts that we have in this provision actually are quite similar to what the Commission is thinking about, but there is only an overlap. Of course, as you mentioned, DG Connect and DG Comp, they are thinking maybe a bit broader, also in terms of consumer protection. You've mentioned also consumer choice. So there will be probably a bit of a different approach on the European level, and it has always been the case, an intellectual, conceptual interplay And we are just happy that the Commission has now taken the new competition tool and the Digital Services Act. And we'll, of course, have a look at what the Commission will table by the end of the year and then see whether, for example, we might even have to look into our draft law. We always, and that's maybe my final point from a legal point of view, member states in the European Union have legally the leeway to have stricter rules than on the European level. And now we'll probably might have stricter rules in some regards on the European level with the DSA, and then we have to see. In the end, you've talked about whether enforcement at the European level or all enforcement with the Commission is better than national level. Cooperation is key. But there are indeed strong force and good arguments to say that at least some key cases have to be enforced on the European level. And I think that's something also the Bundeskartellamt, who is doing great cases and important cases, but some of the cases really should be at the European level.
Many thanks for the clear words. Dear Andreas, maybe the same question to you. Do you see all these principles that the professor are mentioning replicated in the current German approach? And maybe also the second question that Philipp raised: do we really have a problem in Germany identifying structural problems and imposing remedies without finding any abuse?
This is a bit irony of history, that we are the ones who should be against structural problems and solving structural problems. I mean, I remember times when Philip Lowe was Director General, to be a structuralist was not the best thing to hear, let's put it this way. And we were the one who had slept too long and not seen what it meant to do it more economically, the new economic approach and all this. No, I fully agree. And I think this study, it is full of excellent ideas, and it takes a very structured approach. This is what I appreciated most, because I'm constantly saying this for years. What we need is, as competition agencies, we need to have an impact. We really must change things. That's the point. And sometimes talking also to colleagues, sometimes I have the impression, in Germany you say, man bekommt Angst vor der eigenen Courage. You might get fear before your own courage, because also means that you are not only operating in a legal environment, you are also operating in a political environment, and to a certain extent. That yet you have that courage, and that you have backing for that courage from the political side. That is extremely important. And I think everything that is in that study, at least as far as I could read it so far, is taking us into the direction of impact. How do I have an impact? And this is the same what is now happening with the German approach to the 10th Amendment. This is also about to have an impact. I mean, for a long time we had a discussion about fines, and I always said, I don't think that fines will do any better. A fine is a price for the. What will happen with fines when we see the first cases of civil claims against these kind of companies, when you have brought the first successful cases that have been brought to successful end in the last instance before court. I mean, we see what is happening in other areas, and we might see some things in this area as well. But we do not have these cases yet, these huge cases that have been brought to a successful end. So this is all about impact. This is what we do in Germany with the 10th Amendment. This is what we see with the new competition tool. And this is what we see with the Digital Services Act. This is really about changing things. A lot of don'ts, a lot of do's that Philip has mentioned before. I think, Mr. Käseberg, one can say we have them in the law as don'ts. you can put it either way, do or don't, but we have it as don'ts. And I see a high level of consistency with what is happening over here in Germany, what is happening in the UK, By the way, it's also ironic that Philip, coming from the UK, is so much thinking about what should happen at the EU level. That's a nice thing too. But we have much consistency in terms of approaches in the UK, in Germany, at the European level. It might not be all the same, but the approach is very much alike. It's all embedded in an international or European debate, and this is very important that we all go to a certain extent in the same direction. And I think in Brussels we stand in front of a very interesting debate. This is who shall enforce what will be the role of national competition agencies with respect to the Digital Services Act and the new Competition Act. Do they want to enforce? First question. And the second question, does the EU level want them to enforce? That is a question that is not solved yet. And what will be very interesting to see is how DG Connect and DG Comp will get along, because so far I see two initiatives very much going in the same direction. And now we have, or the EU has to put that in a paper, in writing. And now it becomes more specific. And you cannot let these tools just stand beside each other. You must coordinate in a way. And maybe they should read that study. There are some ideas how to coordinate. So we have a horizontal and a vertical need for coordination in this respect. And this needs to be discussed.
I think also the market players wants to know what rules apply in the new competition tool or the ex-ante rules, and also that's another issue. But would you like to add something on?
Just a very short remark, because that's maybe the only thing I would actually to have a bit of a debate disagree with what you've proposed. Maybe it's not the most important part, but institutionally, I think maybe you've sort of looked into the crystal ball and sort of anticipated how the power game inside the Commission will play out. So there might be indeed something of a collaboration or a split, let's say, enforcement between two DGs. That's not the most important thing, but you've talked about silos before. I think our experience and impression is that sometimes you need power silos if we talk about enforcement. For policy, it's good to have collaboration, and it's always good to have information from all kinds of sources. But if you want to go forward fast, and that's what everybody wants, I think our preference still would be to have a reform of the rules, but then give it to somebody with the competence, and to have the power silo maybe inside DG Competition. But that's maybe not the most important point.
What's your comment on this? The first negative remark, yes.
I would first comment one sentence on what Andreas Mundt said. I found it pretty striking that you said that impact is finally achieved with private enforcement and private damage claims. That it would be a part of it and an important part of it. So that's what I understood. Maybe that's a call to the ministry as well, so sort of to look into private damage claims again, which are pretty problematic in German courts at present, and also in other courts. That's just sort of one remark where I found that great that one of the public enforcers, of the important public enforcers, acknowledges this role, because sometimes in the past we had different experiences, or we sort of thought that public enforcers maybe do not sort of push for private enforcement in the same way as others would have it. I leave the critical remark to you, Philip.
Thank you very much. So this is going to be a slightly academic, existential sort of answer, and perhaps we'll see. So of course, was a competition official for many years. I still make competition case decisions for some of the financial regulators and the energy regulator in the UK, and my prior would normally be leave this to the competition officials. You know, they are the ones who do the case by case method. They have the lawyers, the investigators, the economists, especially the remedies people who understand how to impose a remedy that goes along with the technological grain, the developments. These are sorts of things. But in this situation, sometimes we get some criticism in this debate about, oh, you're just imposing object offences again. And we have learned that there's no really place for those. There's a place only for effects-based offences. Well, this is not true. There are clearly things that we know are wrong, and we still have object offences in competition law. And yet the enforcement, at least when I was at the CMA and before the OFT, I was amazed at how long these cases still took. And so I still think that with respect to some of our don'ts and the enforcement of some of our do's, there is a role in some ways for learning from how the regulators act when they have an iterative interaction with these incumbents all the time. Yes, there is the risk sometimes of capture, but there's also the ability to say, look, stop this. We've caught you, and we're going to ask you to stop this right now, and there will be a fine or whatever, or we might revoke your license or whatever. And these kinds of things can focus the mind a lot quicker. So even though with respect to our general approach, while we're trying to modernize in some ways aspects of European law with respect to the platforms, we're not trying to taint or distort competition law enforcement from its main focus. We're trying to complement it with a kind of regulation that moves faster and that is based on clear evidence of obvious harms. And let's move on to say, okay, we've made this now a don't in the legislation. You've done the don't. You must stop it. And none of this, 9, 12-year investigations with full merit appeals. And that's mainly the sort of focus we have. And now then we will be able to have a debate, I'm sure for many months, I hope not many years, about the propriety of that. But the direction of travel of all of these suggestions out there around the world is in that area. Fast action, impact. And moving on before it's too late.
And I believe all this, what we're talking today, it's quite easy to implement if you wish.
Difficult to enforce.
When it comes to the legal certainty, I believe there will be many open issues. Do you have some doubts how it will function in the reality, especially when it comes 19A in Germany?
Of course, legal certainty is not easy to achieve in competition law, and of course 19A leaves question open. But this is a general problem for the time being. Everything that we do as competition agency, whatever case you tackle, you do it this way for the first time. No one has ever done it this way. There is no jurisprudence. You have no idea what the higher regional court in Düsseldorf will say. You have no idea what the Federal Supreme Court will say, and you don't have any idea what will happen in Luxembourg if ever your case goes to Luxembourg. You have to invent your theory of harm. Normally, for the first time, there is no theory of harm which has ever been enforced like this. If you look at the remedies, you have to find the right remedies for the first time. Nobody has done it this way. And nobody has ever said in jurisprudence, if you have this theory of harm, you can cure it with that remedy. And it's proportionate, and it's justified, and all these kind of stuff. So that is a general problem. 19A will make things better because you have predefined theories of harm. I think that is a huge step. Like other clarifications that we have received with the 9th Amendment of the German Competition Act, for example, the question, do we have a market before our eyes where there is no financial transaction between the platform and the consumer?
Data.
And there were judges who said, well, we could have had a long debate about that, although we have applied it like this already for many years. Yeah. So these kinds of clarifications that you go to court and say, listen, it's in the law, we do not to discuss that anymore, that is extremely helpful and helps you to bring cases through. 19A is a new provision also always produces no new questions, but personally I'm very sure that the clarity it brings, that the benefit is much bigger than the uncertainty that is produced by that new provision.
Clear words. Thorsten, would you comment on this?
I think it's really a similar discussion as you've sort of filled it in your study, and that's happening on the European level. It's not so much, maybe as the Commission says, about ex-ante enforcement. So we're not talking about telecommunications regulation, something like that. We're talking about whether how to become sort of stricter on on super dominant platforms than under abuse of dominance, and how to get faster. And that's something that it's not about ex ante to our taste. It's about very open standards that we used to prefer in competition law, versus, on the other hand, more detailed rules. And here we are moving towards rules just to have more legal certainty, to be able to be stricter and faster. And that's from our perspective, the whole debate about the do's and don'ts. And so we are very eager to see the Commission's ideas and proposals on not only what they want to forbid in terms of don'ts, but how exact this will look like, whether it will be more akin to, let's say, open antitrust provisions, or whether it will be a bit more specific. So that's I think, even it sounds technical legalese, I think that's extremely important.
Many thanks. I think we should leave also the possibility for questions from the audience. I see many familiar faces, and I see over there Professor Kerber, and I'm really glad that you're with us.
Thank you so much for this great study and also the great discussion. I have a very different question. And what I found interesting is that in all the recent discussion, also in the consultations, but also in the study, and we have entirely new theoretical concepts for competition. And this is, for example, fairness. And we have also seen a lot in consultations also unequal bargaining power as a new concept, so concepts below market dominance. So in that respect, I see a lot of new concepts also which go beyond the traditional concepts that we are using in competition law. Now my question is, it is hard for me to see how economists now really fill these kind of concepts. So I'm an economist. Everybody who knows me knows that I am also critical to my fellow economists and try to be open-minded, but I'm still asking myself if we are using more here now fairness, for example, in competition cases. How do we fill this? What kind of economic concepts can we fill this? And so how does economics come into this new world? Because this goes really beyond what we are traditionally doing in competition economics.
Shall I try? Okay.
Try,
so I will readily admit that in the English language, as a competition official, I would refer to fairness as an F word. No laughter. Okay. It's not a word we like to use except when we're describing why we've done a case and what we hope to see it change in the marketplace. It's not an operational guiding principle of identifying whether or not there's been a breach of the law, or indeed, as you say, whether the economic evidence shows that there's a problem or not. But I think the concept, beneath fairness, this fairness concept that we're introducing, is this idea of fair trading on the platform. Clear areas where there's some sort of exclusionary conduct on the platform, not letting somebody in. These kinds of things can be identified. But also we need your help as economists to identify another aspect of fairness you mentioned, which is the degree of economic dependency. As President Mundt has mentioned earlier, the relative market power differentials. This is something which economics can help us with. And also unavoidability of trading partners. All of these kind of have fairness concepts in them, but the point is that we're not making sort of fairness. What is fair to you, what is fair to me, is obviously something that will differ by subjectivity. But we're making that sort of the direction with respect to the fairness on the platforms. And I think there's a great area for not necessarily completely new economics, because I wouldn't want our proposals to be seen as a way of creating a whole new industry of economists and lawyers identifying whether there's regulatory failure or not and defining what self-preferencing means and things like that. But with respect to the unavoidability of a trading partner, economic dependency, whether or not you've done something that seems clearly unfair by our rules, so that we have said you've pushed somebody off the platform, and the degree to which that might be a harm, I think there's all sorts of aspects where even traditional economics can play a hugely informative role.
President Mundt would like to comment?
Not really a comment, but Mr. Kerber, maybe the pendulum is swinging back a little bit. Huh? I mean, it's been a more economic approach for a decade, and now it seems the time of the lawyers is back. I mean, if you should listen to Philip and others who speak of structural preconditions for functioning competition. Well, it's your task now to find a tablet for making that an economic theory. No, but I agree with what Philip has said. Of course, we have more per se regulation now. We also have, with 19A, a certain ex-ante regulation, because we can intervene in markets in the future where the incumbent or the company with a paramount significance for competition across market, we can intervene in markets where this incumbent is not dominant yet. And this is for me, this is a clear regulative approach, but still in a spirit and rooted in competition law. And this is where it belongs from my perspective. We have kind of predefined theories of harm, but I still believe the identification that a certain behavior is really fulfilling this theory of harm. I think that is still, in many cases, an economic task to look at. And by the way, we still do merger control, so don't worry, we still need you.
I see Oshrit over there, the co-author of the paper regarding privacy and competition with Professor Michal Dahl. Please.
Thank you for the introduction. I actually have two questions. I hope you will have time for both of them. One is more of the view that you guys have, and I think I'm picking up a little bit on the question that someone else asked before. When digital giants, that you already discussed a lot about regulating them, using privacy protection acts like GDPR as a spin for anti-competitive acts. And I guess we have plenty of examples, but the iGDPR that recently was announced by Apple is a major one, I think. I would love to hear the view whether you actively act upon it, or what's your general view on that? This would be the first question. The second is really general, and I would love to know how do you refer to economies or markets that integrate self-regulation program, if it's something that is even considered while you're regulating markets on competition, privacy, innovation, etc.
I don't want to answer the second question, but maybe...
Shall I try the second while people are thinking of the answer for the first? So the second, I mean, and you can tell me later if I've just avoided your question. An important aspect of trying to create do's and don'ts, for me, is to try to build in a culture of compliance within a company. And that could include some degree of self-regulation. Now, before everybody bursts into laughter at the idea that these companies would ever regulate themselves, obviously this requires regulation to force it into the company. And in here, I mentioned that we're going to hear a little bit later tonight from some in-house lawyers. And I actually believe, maybe I'm still a young, naive person, I'm not that young though, and maybe I'm not that naive, that sometimes the first line of defense is actually the in-house lawyers. And if they have some clear guidance from the Bundeskartellamt or the European Commission or from some regulation, that this is a do, okay, this is a don't, stay away. Even though in the creation of that do's and don'ts, there will have been some sort of huge debate about, are we over-enforcing, are we over-intervening, are we chilling some sort of innovation or competition? But the thing is, that is an idea where you can give them that clarity and maybe they can actually help. Now, some people would say, no, they're just acting in their company's interests. But I think there is an aspect where we shouldn't automatically dismiss self-regulation completely, because some of these companies are finally waking up to the fact that this is having, a tide is coming. Last year here I said winter is coming, like that, and instead it was a pandemic that was coming. But, it was a different kind of change. But the thing is that, I'll finish with this, I'm not saying we leave this to the companies to work this out, not at all. This is not going to happen anyway. Regulation is coming. I am very concerned that if people don't look at some of our suggestions and think, actually, they are kind of reasonable, they are kind of sensible, if they just spend their time, fighting this, then, and nothing happens with respect to the reasonable suggestions, then you will see other bodies, much more powerful than competition authorities, come in and clear the decks with some certain particular rules or initiatives that might be really harmful. And I'm on record as saying that the most anti-competitive things I've ever seen in my life are things that governments have done, not that cartels have done. And so I really do feel that there's an opportunity for a discussion back and forth, with the regulated bodies, and try to internalize into them the reason that they have to change their conduct, maybe have to change their entire business model sometimes. Some of these models are extremely toxic and have a range of negative externalities that don't necessarily even touch on competition, but touch on actual harms to democracy or to people's upbringing. But we're just trying to see what can competition and regulation do in this space. And maybe I've spent so much time talking that we've all forgotten your first question.
Always a pleasure to listening to you. Would like to comment, Austin, something or?
Well, you gave us the time to think about the first question as well, but maybe on the second, maybe we should compare how old we are, because you said young and naive and an age. And to be frank, I personally don't believe in self-regulation in that area, because it's just against the self-interest of companies. Maybe there is space if we move on, if you have cases where you need, where you move on into data interoperability, things like that, where you need technical codes for what kind of data should be put forward to actors, things like that. But in terms of really the first step, the in-house lawyers, I'm not sure whether they look into self-regulation codes, but into what hard enforcement afterwards would actually be the kind of the boundary. And with regard to the first, I'm not quite sure whether I really got it completely, what you asked, if the question was that GDPR and, let's say, data protection and, for example, differential data protection can be also barrier to entry and could be an instrument to sort of game the competition, then, well, yes, could be. That's something that also, for example, IP or other law, legal instrument can be. So the relation is, I think, super intricate and really depends on the case, as, for example, in the Facebook case. So I can't come up with a good answer.
Well, just very briefly, maybe. I mean, self-regulation is something positive to watch, but personally, I believe it's always better to have a proceeding in the backhand, to really, in order to really fix it. Always, sometimes when we come to commitment decisions by companies, I'm wondering if we haven't gone far enough, because if they agree, you sometimes have the sentiment maybe you haven't hit the point. So that is a feeling that you might have in some proceedings. With GDPR, for me, GDPR has always been Janusköpfig. Or how do you say that in English? It has two coins, two sides of a coin. On the one hand, it's a great piece of work. We have tried to make use of it also in the Facebook case because it sets a standard, the theory of harm that is behind it. On the other side, what we also see is GDPR, in our experience, and we have already discussed that, very much helps the big ones. Because they say, come to me. We can organize it. If you come to me, you are legal. You are in a legal space. You do it right because we do it right. And I'm not saying this is a huge competition problem, but it is a problem. And this is something that we observe from time to time. So GDPR, again, a great piece of work, a standard, to a certain extent, even a world standard, but it has its pitfalls, of course, if you look into competition issues, that is so.
We'll have similar topics in the first and second and third session, so please be patient. There will be opportunities for further questions. Now we have to finish the discussion. I really like the title of the book, Restoring the Balanced Digital Competition. Maybe that would be really my final question to you, maybe with a couple of remarks. Some politicians sometimes have too high expectations when it comes to modernizing the competition rules and what effects will be at the end of the day. What's your thinking on this? Are we going to restore the competition if we really go this way, and what can we expect in near future? Maybe starting with the authors and then the President Mundt and Thorsten.
I tend to say that competition law is just a tiny bit of what we need to do now. I mean, we are discussing this, obviously competition, people always think of competition, but obviously we are also discussing this from a viewpoint of economic policy and of a sort of systemic competition with, say, companies from China and also companies from the US. And I think that it is absolutely normal to discuss it from this point as well. And here I see politicians sort of in the need to do much more than reforming competition policies. Andreas Mundt and Margrethe Vestager and their teams are fantastic and great, and they do a lot for free competition. But if our companies, industrial companies, whatever companies, really want to succeed, we probably need much more efforts from other people in, say, government or legislation, etc. We need digital infrastructure in the EU that is better. We need more private equity, venture capital. We need more sort of entrepreneurial culture, more education in this regard, etc., etc., etc. And probably Corona has all shed a good light on where we have certain deficits in this regard. And so I would always be a bit modest with what we are doing here. What we are trying to preserve is sort of some fundamentals of how we do business, of how people can engage in markets, but for sort of really coming into a digital economy that is sort of, as you put it before, not shaping us, but that we are shaping, we need to do much more in Europe, and that is a task not really for competition agencies, and that's something that I would always stress.
Many thanks, Ruprecht.
And within the competition bubble itself, when we talk about restoring balance, what I believe Ruprecht and I and others are talking about is all we're trying to do is note that you have great power, some of these platforms and aggregators. And with great power, somebody once told Spider-Man, comes great responsibility. And we are trying to impose on you, through the do's and the don'ts, the responsibilities, to therefore restore the balance. A politician who wants a quick win, who wants a European cloud company or whatever, you know, that's not going to happen through some of our rules, okay? We're trying to put these rules in place to go with the grain of technological developments, to, in a sense, restore, as Ruprecht said, some of the fundamental values of our democracy and our economic foundation in the digital world as well, which is openness, interoperability, the idea that you can enter and leave quickly, these kinds of things. You will have sort of some fair treatment on a platform. These kinds of things are really strong constitutional values. We're just trying to reintroduce them because I think they've largely been forgotten. Right? And finally, we're just trying to say, actually, that in the process, we hope to see more competitive outcomes. Right? So yes, many politicians may well be saying this is not enough, we need to do more. That's what I'm afraid of. I don't want them to do something strong and interventionist, and that's why I think that our approach, frankly and humbly, is measured, you know, and is not some drastic, scary intervention that the sky will fall apart and all of these companies will go out of business because of Ruprecht Podszun and Philip Marsden, you know, like that, or the stronger regulators and agencies who might do something with these suggestions. It won't. All we're trying to do is add to the great power some great responsibility and thereby restore the balance.
And we have this discussion already at least 3-4 years intensively, and to rephrase you, now it's time to legislate. So I'm glad that Thorsten is with us. Thorsten, are we going to restore the balance, the digital competition, with the new act in Germany?
As to have said before, and Ruprecht, it's a tiny piece. It's a beginning, and we'll see lots of other things. I mean, One other sentence, maybe not with great power comes great responsibility, is from another area, is follow the money. I mean, make those companies pay taxes, make them pay content providers and artists. And competition is one part of an agenda, and let's see whether maybe we're going to see more structural changes, separation of certain activities in the future. I think we are really now, if you look on the scale, the last 2 years we discussed whether we have stricter enforcement, interpretation of European competition policy. Now we have the European proposals, we have German other proposals, and this will continue. And as you said, it's one piece of many things that will probably and should actually happen.
Many things. When it comes to separation, you have already ordered a certain kind of separation, but obviously it will come something more in the future. The same question to you, President Mundt. Are we going to restore the competition also thanks to your support in your activities?
Well, I hope in the very end we will do it right. I mean, you will all watch, and we have to do. That's a different position. Just 2 messages. One is we should not forget what we have done so far. We are not completely reinventing the wheel. I mean, we had a 9th amendment of the law, and we have benefited a lot from this. And there are cases out there that have the quality to really go to the heart. I don't want to bore you with a Facebook case, but this case really goes to the heart, because for me, it's one of the first cases that really goes to the root of dominance. And we will see what we can make out of this. And so we have done things already. We will be able to do them easier now, but we have done things already. Second message, this is only the economic part of the big picture. Not that the economic part is not important, it's a very important part, but it's only a part. And if you think about the fact that in the Philippines there are thousands of people sitting in front of a screen watching extreme violence, extreme porn with kids and everything, to take a quick decision if that has to be removed from Facebook, YouTube or whatever or not. If I would present that to you in Germany as a business case and tell you, look, I'm doing this social network, but it has side effects. And this is one of the side effects, that thousands of people will have to sit in front of the screen in Germany, having to watch this, all in psychological treatment afterwards. Then you know what I'm talking about, and then you know that economics is really a part of it. We have done nothing with regard to regulation, with regard to our kids, who can consume all this in the internet. We have no real means against hate speech, against mobbing, and I'm not so sure that we are really able to protect the democratic build-up of the minds of the people if we really are able to control that in the social media. So again, this is an important part, but it is a debate that is of extreme importance for the whole society. And there are many articles out there just right now who ask, is our brain, are our minds really fit for what is happening here, for all these social media issues? So we really must go further. But this is an important step. Again, I don't want to minimize it. I don't want to say it's too little. But we have to go much further, and you have to do much, much more.
Many thanks for your wonderful remarks. As you said, this is the first step. You said also that we have really wonderful cases already done. And now I'm remembering that we discussed last year the Amazon case and all the commitments. I'm really looking forward what happened in the meantime and how the whole issue develops. Maybe we'll see something at European level. The study is here. Please enjoy the lecture. It was really great to listen to you, and many thanks for your questions. Now the time has come for a small break. Please be careful and respect the corona rules, and we continue like in 10 minutes. Many thanks.